It's not going to be that long anyway. So, we know that AI is being used to generate a lot of the junk that we see in social media, that it's being used to create increasingly realistic videos, news stories, articles, and so forth. And it's made it a little bit harder for people, perhaps, to determine what is really true and what is not. And one interesting suggestion comes from Michael Caufield, who suggests that, while AI is good at producing miscellaneous things that aren't quite real, it can also be very useful in detecting things that are not backed up or not realistic or not true. Um, and If you'd like to make a copy of the slides, you can. I'll put this in the chat. But you can scan this with your phone, your camera, whatever, because it does contain some links that you might find useful. Either take a picture of that diagram or aim your phone at that diagram, type in that tiny URL, or click on the link in chat. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we can use the SIFT approach that Michael Caufield came up with, and how he built that into a number of AI platforms. And if you would like to try this yourself, if you have a ChatGPT account, log into it. If you don't have one, you can create a free one just using any Gmail address that you'd like. And I think it will still work with free ones, but it will not work with the most recent free ones. But I believe we can still go back to version 3, which is where it should work. Okay, so the SIFT approach, again, was developed by Caufield. He describes it in a book, or he describes this in many other things in terms of helping students and people in general develop more critical perspective on things that they see online. And this has been used as a basis for lots of freshman courses and basic intro courses in college on critical thinking or digital literacy and so on. And there's 4 moves of SIFT. And I'm just going to list them here, and then we'll talk about each of those. Stop, investigate the source, find better coverage. Oh, and I overlapped. I added the book URL, and it got a little color contrast issue there. But sorry about that. But let's go in and talk about each. So the first thing is, if you see something online in social media, on Facebook, Instagram, or other places, many people, when they see something that triggers emotions, will just immediately share it, which is kind of the purpose. So the SIFT approach involves: don't believe things at first. Don't reshare things. Check to see if whoever the source is reputable. And you will often see people trying to, well, we've all seen ways in which people try to fake legitimate references and so on. And investigating the source would involve things like who authored it? Are they credible? And who published it? Is this a real document? Is this coming from a real study? Go back and look at where the claims are coming from and whether they seem to be real. And these are all pretty obvious for us, but for students, it may not always work that way. And for many of the people we see posting or reposting things on social media, that's not always going to happen. And what is their agenda? And so, and then once you find out where the source is, go back and trace the claims back to some original context, find out where it came from, and so on. So that's the SIFT approach. It's pretty simple, but it has a nice simple acronym, and it's not a bad thing to share with students, just as a way of evaluating information they see online in social media that claims to be news. But what I really wanted to do here is to share the ChatGPT Deep Background GPT, or chatbot, that was created by Mike Caufield. And also, if you want to find more about it, you can click on this link and it takes you to the prompt that he used to generate it, which you could then take that prompt and plug it into other platforms. He suggests this works best on Claude, especially the newest versions of Claude, but you do need a paid account on Claude to use those newer ones, and because you have to have web search enabled. But basically, the way this works is that it will take the claims and it will do each of these steps. It will go back and verify the source, evaluate the source, do some web search to see how credible the source appears to be. Then it will find the original sources and so forth. So it basically does the whole step, that whole process. And let's just try it. It does not work with the free version of 5.3, but it does work with versions of 03. So let's see. Well, I have the paid version, but by default though, it defaults to the creator's model of release 3, which is about a year and a half old. So it's a kind of an ancient, version of ChatGPT. What would you like to claim? These were some things that came up in there from recent searches that other people have done. What claim would you like to investigate? And we can see how well it works.
Ooh, something about learning styles, John.
Oh, we heard about that actually in a workshop this morning. So yeah, or isn't it, let's say, is it important that faculty teach to students um, well, yeah, there we go, learning styles. And let's see what it says. And you notice it's checking some reasonable sites, Science Direct, and oh, that was pretty quick. So it warns you that this printout may be out of date if you look at it later, or this summary. Um, Adapting instruction to, so there's two claims that they took out of this. They created the claim, and technically I was supposed to put in a claim, but the moderate one is that adapting instruction to match students' learning styles will make classes more engaging. And then a more strong one is that faculty must diagnose and teach to individual learning styles. And the verified facts are that there's no credible evidence that matching instruction to self-reported learning styles improves outcomes, and it does link to articles that verify that support that claim. It shows that 58% of UK university academics still believe that's effective. Actually, studies in the US are much higher. It's especially high. It's like 90 some percent of high school teachers. The American Psychological Association warns that this is a neuromyth, and there's a press release on that from 2019. Now, that students do have modality preferences, but that does not reliably enhance their memory or comprehension. And this is a pretty reasonable summary, and it has some decent evidence on that. So yeah, and it does suggest that multimodal active learning is helpful, but it's helpful for everyone rather than trying to match just learning styles. So that's a nice summary. So it's incorrect. The strong statement, well, the first statement is incorrect. The second, well, this other version of it is unsubstantiated. There's no evidence that this is true. So, okay, another claim. Or you can try them on your own and let us know what it finds. Anyone have a claim they'd like to verify or debunk?
I read this morning that in the US, support for gay marriage is down as we are beginning to celebrate Pride season.
Okay, let's see that, because it does do web search. So let's take the claim that support for gay marriage is down in the US. At the start, well, we could say at the start of Pride Month. And let's see how that goes. But it's identifying the likely sources. It's tracing it to the original claims, and it's doing all those steps. It's kind of nice just watching it go through the steps that it's doing, so you can see the processing it's using. So verified facts is that 65% of US adults say it should remain legal. It has fallen by 6% from the record higher in 2022 to 2023. And it's driven almost entirely by Republicans because that is part of the official party line. But it also notes that support rose from 27% in 1996 to above 70% by 2022. So the pendulum has swung back a tiny bit, but it's still far above where it was, a decade ago. So, well, 2 decades ago, sorry. I lose track of those things. So, it did a pretty decent job, I think. Any other claims you'd like to try, or has anyone tried a claim that to see what and let us know what it found? Well,
John, hey,
yes,
John, just a quick question. So if I am, I use Claude most often, and if I am embedding that prompt that you gave us, um,
yes.
do I have to do that every time I'm going to check one of these claims then? Is that
You can create the equivalent of a GPT in Claude, and I don't remember how because I haven't done that recently. I've been using Claude for coding recently, but I haven't done the equivalent of a chatbot in it. But when in doubt, you can ask any tool. So can I use, can I create, let's say, a a chatbot in Claude? And actually, let me be a little bit strong. Oh, well, that doesn't belong there. That would not be a claim you'd be testing here. So let's go back to a new chat. Can chatbots be created? It might be better to ask Claude itself, but Claude projects. You create a focused workspace with its own instructions, chat history, and knowledge base. You can upload documents, project information, and so forth. Okay, I haven't worked as much with that, but the suggestion is a basic chatbot, use a project and include the prompt. If you
I
want
will
to,
say I just used it with the language and it produced about the same results that you just got here in chat. So it's good.
yeah, that prompt, the one that's posted in his blog post, I think is the prompt that he used for both of them. So, ooh, Echo 101 course assistant. See, ChatGPT knows me pretty well. But I am curious, if we go back and let's grab that and let's see what Gemini could do. And basically, here is a prompt. So I'm going to copy that. And let's see what Gemini will do. It just didn't do as well in the last session in creating a QR code, but as ChatGPT does. But let's try pasting this in and see what it does. Okay. So what do we want to check with Gemini? Well, how about this? Let's try something we just did. So let's go back to the learning styles and rephrasing a little bit. Let's say faculty should teach to the learning styles of individual students. And let's see what it does. Because if this does work, it could be converted into a gem in the same sort of way as the GPT has done. And this is putting in a more general discussion, but it's coming up with verified facts that it's reformatting it, it's formatting it differently, but it is basically saying learning styles are not real. So, okay, it worked. I like the output a little bit better in ChatGPT, but it eventually got to the same point. But it's kind of fun. And, sharing this with students might not be a bad thing, or just getting them to think a little bit more critically before they share things. Or those relatives, the ones you meet over holidays and things who have, learned all sorts of new things since the last time you talked to them. So, okay, any questions or thoughts on this? It's a nice use of the search capabilities of large language models. And they've gotten so much better at this. When they first came out, but one of the things that happened in some of our sessions on the AI, when we had the AI symposium here, was a lot of people were talking about how unreliable the large language models are, how poorly they responded to questions. That's not the case as much as it was just 6 months or a year ago. They've gotten dramatically better, and adding search capabilities allows them to come up with some fairly good responses to questions, especially when, as you notice, it embeds the sources for these things. And pretty much all of them do that now, especially if you use the thinking models. Although this was just in the Flash model, I could have upgraded a little bit to the thinking level, or the Flash or the thinking level would probably be better. But in any case, it would also be a lot slower. Okay, so that's all I had to share here. But any questions or comments or thoughts? It would be nice if social media built these in when people post things and automatically append these things, rather than the community responses, which may not be any more reliable than the original post. Okay,
This is really good, John.
Okay.
It seems to be working faster for me than for you. And it came right up with answers to questions that I've put into it.
And what were the questions, or what did it say?
I asked about the hypothesis that life on Earth originated on Mars, and it did a good job with the substantiating potential for life to have existed on Mars and for Martian material to be transported to Earth, but then came out with the life on Earth originally derived from Mars is unsubstantiated, and gave some good reasonable references for it. But it did that instantaneously.
Well, most of the models are much faster now than they were, say, 3 weeks ago when we were in the finals and paper writing stages of the semester, because we do have a very strong seasonality in the patterns of use of all the large language models, but especially ChatGPT.
Some of which
Yes.
relates to a session from earlier today on academic integrity.
And it may have some relationship there. Yes. By the way, earlier today, Paul mentioned the podcast that we just had. It's a really good one, and they're the authors of the book that will be one of our fall reading groups, almost certainly. The only hesitation is the book is delayed a little bit. We were hoping it was going to be out this summer, and it will be out this summer on Kindle, but it's not going to come out until the third week of September. And that's a bit late to start a reading group unless we go late into the semester or we condense the number of meetings down. So we'll have to make some decisions about that. But if we don't do it in the fall, we'll probably do it in the spring. But I'm hoping we still can do it in the fall, and maybe the pace will pick up a little bit. Sometimes books come out sooner, but they had a pretty quick, they wrote and edited and have it ready within less than a year, which is a pretty remarkable turnaround. But all three people are really good people to have as authors. So I'm hoping it came together as nicely in the book as it sounded when we were discussing it with them. Okay, well, I guess that's it for this session. So good seeing you all, and play around with this. It's kind of fun, and it's a nice productive use of generative AI.
Thanks, John.